Welcome to But Are There Dragons, a podcast where two friends pick a book at least one of them has not read and work their way through it a few chapters at a time. I'm your host, Kritter.
And I'm Jessica.
And we're kicking off this adventure with The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, with me as the resident Lord of the Rings veteran.
And me as a Tolkien first-timer.
In this, our second episode, we'll be covering chapters 3 through 5 of The Hobbit. Before we dive in, Jessica, how are you feeling?
Good. We did a lot in these chapters.
We did a lot in these chapters.
We did a lot.
So, excited to talk about them, I take it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very.
One of these chapters is like the chapter. So I'm excited to talk about that one specifically, and you'll know what I'm talking about when we get to it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's dive in. Chapter 3, A Short Rest. The party gets their first peek at the Misty Mountains, and when Bilbo finds out how much farther there is to go, he once again wishes he was home, feeling more tired than he'd ever felt. How are you feeling about our protagonist so far and the journey he's found himself on?
I want to give him a big hug because I, again, am over-relating to poor Bilbo. I had a note here about, I think at the beginning of the chapter and a little bit later, when that realization hits Bilbo, just how far from home he is and how it's probably really going to be a long time, truly, until he's back there. I had the same quote that you just gave. Just at that moment, he felt more tired than he ever remembered feeling before. And I just, again, I think that that's Tolkien doing a very good job of giving us an opportunity to really see how tired Bilbo is and how homesick he is.
Yeah, I totally related to that. You know, whenever you're on like a 2-week Euro trip, right? By day like 12, you're like, wow, I'm more tired than I've ever been before. How relatable. Like, super relatable. But yeah, like I felt so bad for him because he's just doing his best on this trip that like he didn't even really super want to go on, but got kind of kicked out of his door into. And now it's not so fun. Now it's getting less pleasant. And he keeps moaning to himself, like, it's supposed to be summer or whatever. Like you know, it's and this is June, you know, he keeps complaining. So I get it. I totally get it. So thankfully, Gandalf leads the party to the secret valley of Rivendell. And as they descend, their spirits begin to rise. And then they hear elves singing a silly song. If you're familiar with the Wheel of Time, the description of their descent into Rivendell really reminded me of how it feels to enter into what's called a steading, particularly because it later says that evil things don't come into that valley. That being said, did anything stand out to you about the description of the elves or Rivendell?
Well, spot on with the geography, right? The way that the descent was described and how they were standing over ravines that you could step across, but they plummeted. So a lot of that imagery was very graphic, which again helps me, somebody like me has trouble visualizing these things. Very descriptive language like that really helps. The other thing is I couldn't help but notice these elves are so different than anything we've seen portrayed in the movies. However, again, I'm a little bit older than you, so I don't know if you remember the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings cartoons.
No, I need to see those. I've never seen them. I know.
Okay, so I'm gonna be cool. But they were a staple of my childhood. So this was one of several times over this block of reading where I was like, oh, this is a way that this is very similar to the way it was represented in the cartoons, but I didn't see it in any of the Peter Jackson material.
Okay.
And so that was kind of a weird It was fine, right? Even if things don't match the media that I've been exposed to, I have no issue with that. But it was kind of this weird throwback moment where I got a little nostalgic and I was like, oh, I remember that from the cartoons. And okay, so that's a departure. That's different.
Yeah. I really liked how they mentioned that dwarves find them foolish and that
Mm-hmm.
they make fun of the dwarves, especially for their beards. So
Mm-hmm.
having, been exposed to the movies, you knew that like dwarves and elves kind of butt heads sometimes. And so that was
Mm-hmm.
kind of our first hint here that was just that, no matter where we are, dwarves and elves are probably not going to like each other.
Yeah.
Also, I wrote down too, they're laughing, they're jolly, they're also
Mm-hmm.
apparently gossips. Like they have an extensive spy network, or like at least
Mm-hmm.
they're really tapped into the news of the day. All things that I was like, oh, that's not really something I recall, other than Elrond just knowing things. But I guess I always
Mm-hmm.
assumed that was just kind of a magical thing that he had.
Absolutely. I
Yeah,
absolutely chalked it up to he's also a magic user, so he has ways and means, eyes and ears, whatever
yeah.
he's got ways.
Yeah, and in this case, apparently, it's just that they're just tapped into the news, the hot goss. So yeah,
Turns out.
they're way more regal, way less jolly in the movies, and so
Mm-hmm.
reading it again after only being exposed to the movies for such a long period of time was kind of jarring. It was just like, oh gosh, these elves, they're
Mm-hmm.
they're more like what the elves from like Santa's workshop or whatever, the
Yes.
happy-go-lucky people. So it works. It follows what you expect from elves, just not what I have grown to expect from Lord of the Rings elves.
I'll be curious to see how. So again, because I have no skin in the game, right? Like I don't care if anything matches the movies or
Right,
not.
right.
I'll be interested to see how that translates into, whether or not they have fighting skills and those things that they're very renowned for in the world as Peter Jackson portrayed it. I'll be curious to see if there's more a divergence.
Yeah, I'm similarly curious, even between The Hobbit and the trilogy. So
Mm-hmm.
again, it's been a long time since I've read them. So I'm wondering if we're getting the silliness, the goofiness, because it's a happier time during this phase of Middle Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this is also more of a children's story, right? And so later, are we going to get the more regal elves? And that's just how they were in the trilogy versus the Hobbit. Only time will
Interesting.
tell. Only
Interesting.
time will tell.
I
Yeah.
will totally give you dibs that you called it if that's how that comes out.
Okay. Thanks. So so they reach the last homely house
Mm.
where Elrond dwells. Turns out he is the chief of a line of beings who had both elves and heroes of the North, men, in their lineage.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, here we go. I've got a description of my book. I'm opening it up. Okay. He was noble and as fair in face as an elf lord, as strong as a warrior, as wise as a wizard, as venerable as a king of dwarves, and as kind as summer. Oh, to be described like that.
Mm.
Like wow. What a description. This place, it sounds super nice. Elrond sounds incredible. I would be tempted to stay.
Yeah,
How about you?
for sure. But also, does that mean that Elrond is half human?
Not half. Yeah, wait. Okay, I've done this on my TikTok, actually. He is
Oh
part.
my god, I think I saved that TikTok.
Yeah, no, he's part human. He comes from a line of humans.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so he's I think he's a quarter human.
That's outside of the scope of the book.
It's shoot, yeah. We need to read the Silmarillion to get that backstory, probably.
Yeah, so that's why I'm mentioning it now. Like, if we get there, I don't want to ruin that. So
I'm sorry. Apologies. Let's just
no
say,
sorries.
yeah, according to The Hobbit, the book, he does come from a line of people that descends from men. So he's at least part man, which is interesting because that's not always the case with elves.
So I had forgotten that. Honestly, I had forgotten that part.
Oh, well, having read the Silmarillion most recently of all of the Lord of the Rings books, I was like, oh my gosh, they mentioned that. I noticed it because I was, I didn't realize there was any hints to that before. Okay, so yeah, definitely would consider staying in Rivendell. Like, sounds amazing.
100%.
So Elrond reads the runes on the swords. Turns out they're famous. Thorin got Orcrist, the Goblin Cleaver, and Gandalf got Glamdring, the Foe Hammer, made in Gondolin for the High Elves during the Goblin Wars. So we get these little pieces of lore sprinkled throughout the book. Do you like it? Do you want more context, or are you good to just get these little references?
I definitely like it. I feel as though for the first read through and having like this is already only chapter 3, I'm okay with drips.
Okay.
I'm already knowing like there's a lot more to this world, and so I don't need 4 generations of lineage on the sword because I already know that I could get overwhelmed pretty easy.
Yeah. And that's why a lot of people struggle with the Silmarillion.
Yeah.
For that reason exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so Elrond, who's apparently incredible, legendary, also discovers moon letters on the party's map, pointing them to where and when the keyhole to the secret passage into the Lonely Mountain will be visible. So, how lucky was it that they happened to show Elrond the map on the exact right day, and that they also now have to figure out when Durin's Day is going to happen so they can be there on time? Like, this feels like very unlikely scenarios all at once, right?
Let me tell you, Kritter, it's all in caps. I still cannot believe it. It just so happens they opened the map on the right day, in the right moon. Who'da thunk it?
Who would have thunk it?
So yeah. I remember noting that I didn't note it in the cartoon because I was a kid, but I remember noting it in the movies. I was like, oh, how fortunate. Something that ties into that, though, that I think only happens in the book, I don't recall it from any of the movies, is that someone, I can't remember who because I didn't take a good enough note, asks if there's anything further on the map. And Elrond's response is, none to be seen by this moon.
Yeah.
Which I realize is probably just him being a mercurial magic user. But at the same time, I'm like, the inference is there could be other moon runes to be seen by another moon.
Yeah, it's like that turns into my Wordle, right? That I always do at like 11:55 p.m. every night. So every night, like, oh shoot, I'm about to go to sleep. Let me open this map up. Make sure there aren't any moon runes on it today. So inconvenient.
Crazy. So crazy.
Yeah, it's not even like phase of the moon either. It's like, new moon on the spring equinox and whatever, like wild. Yeah. Absolutely silly stuff. Okay, so now I know you love a good book and possibly love a well-stocked bookshelf even more. Do you share Bilbo's love of maps, runes, letters, and cunning handwriting?
So I wrote Bilbo loves maps, super cute. I think that they're pretty. There was this is my turn to overshare. There was a class that I took in 3rd grade called Map Skills, and I did not do very well.
Oh no.
Did not do well at all. So I think that maps are pretty, but they intimidate me.
Okay. Well, I mean, it did say that even though Bilbo loves cunning handwriting, his handwriting leaves something to be desired. So you're like Bilbo in that way. You appreciate a good map, letter, whatever. Maybe you're not going to be the first person to create it yourself.
No.
Okay, fair enough. I actually have the map of Middle Earth on my wall. You can't see it on the video, but it's just right there. It was one of my first maps that I fell in love with.
I have a fantasy map hanging in my living room currently. It's just not, unfortunately, not from Lord of the Rings.
That's funny. Well, yeah, and I also have a Wheel of Time map right here that if you're watching, you can see behind me. But anyways, I love a good map too, but trying to make it myself would be. And obviously, I feel like if I were making a map, I wouldn't want to do moon letters because that's so inconvenient. If you want somebody to know something by putting it into a map, like, make it easier. I don't know. It's problematic. Okay, so I'm like fixated on this unlikely map situation, but the next morning, the party continues on refreshed, and that is the end of chapter 3. Thoughts on their brief stop in Rivendell before we move on?
So I did pick a different favorite quote from this chapter. Now, it is a strange thing, but things that are good to have and days that are good to spend are soon told about and not much to listen to, while things that are uncomfortable, palpitating, and even gruesome may make a good tale and take a deal of telling anyways, which is just a very flowery way to say they had a really good 2-week sesh, and that's all there is to say about that. But again, the sentiment absolutely translates that when things are good, there's not a lot to report. There's my other favorite quote from this one is for the literary umami bit. Full of the noise of stones and foam. I just could feel a babbling brook running over stones with that comment.
Yeah. Maybe the spray of water coming up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it does legitimately foam as it comes down the hill. It's just incredible.
Yeah.
And then Elvish singing Not a Thing to Miss in June Under the Stars, Not If You Care for Such Things. I just wow. I wrote just wow next to it. The imagery was stunning, but there was a hidden Artex reference that really got me, which obviously Artex does not predate The Hobbit, but there was a
What is
comment.
Artex? What is Artex?
Artex. Did you see the oh my god, the Never Ending Story?
Oh my gosh, I think I have, but I don't remember any of it. It was like so long ago.
So there was a mention when they were describing all of the scenery going down into Rivendell about a bog that's green on top, but a pony with a pack could never make it through. And for my traumatized Gen X brain, I immediately went, Artex!
Did that happen? I take it somebody died or got sucked into a swamp.
The
That's
horse.
So sad. Oh no! That's so sad!
Yes.
I hate that.
Yeah. You know.
We're about to get some more horse trauma, coincidentally, in chapter 4. So, are you ready?
No, I'm not ready. And so, and the last thing is, Thorin says, I am Durin's heir. And I feel as though I should know that, but felt like new information in the moment. So I've certainly seen enough media that should not be news, but I did not. It felt like news in the moment. So
I think, yeah, that's a fair thing to consider news. Honestly, in my mind now, it's like any important dwarf, I would just assume is Durin's heir, but that's only coming after, Rings of Power, reading the Silmarillion, all that other stuff. So just having casually watched the movies, you would have no expectation. Or and then you also watch Rings of Power, right?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, so having seen those things, you maybe could have guessed that, but that's definitely not something you should have assumed.
And then the last thing was just a little bit about Elrond. Is there's hype about what an icon Elrond is, apparently. But he figures prominently in other stories. This one, not so much. I thought that was very cute from the narrator perspective to be like, yeah, he's kind of a big deal, but not so much today.
Yeah. Once again, the narrator just slaying, being like, we're not going to talk about that. But I'm gonna briefly mention it because I know more than you. It's always that I know more than you thing, but it's in a fun way. And also it drives me nuts. Not truly, but when he says "of course" or as Bilbo says "of course," we get that later in this. We'll talk about this later, but it's just not of course. That's not something that everybody knows. It's not common knowledge. Don't assume that. Okay, so let's move on to chapter 4. Over hill and under hill. So the party ascends into the Misty Mountains, and the going is unpleasant, though relatively uneventful until a thunder battle descends upon them, complete with stone giants yeeting rocks at each other. Philly and Killy, who are the youngest, so we're getting some things about the dwarves. Philly and Killy, the youngest, get sent off to find a more secure shelter, and they find one, a nice dry cave. At this point, were you suspicious? Any alarm bells going off for you?
Sus. Just sus. Of course it is. Nice and dry.
Yeah, why wouldn't it be? On the top of a scary mountain.
Sure.
Yeah, where Gandalf was like, bad things are coming way sooner than you expect. All of that. Yeah. Okay. So, turns out, there be goblins! Though Bilbo luckily raised the alarm in time for Gandalf to dispatch a few of them with a blast of power and slip away. So did Gandalf using magic as an attack surprise you here? Or do you think this was one of Gandalf's famous fireworks? Because it wasn't clear.
I nothinged it.
You just didn't even think about it.
I just didn't even. Yeah. I think it's a really good question, but it didn't even occur to me that because we haven't really seen him use power. This would be
Mm-hmm.
the first time he's used power. And I just kind of took it as a given.
Okay, that's
So no,
fair.
I did not treat it as fireworks, but I did just take it as a matter of course. And I do kind of chalk that up to being familiar with this media in other
Well,
spaces.
sure, and he's a wizard, so like
Yes.
whether it's fireworks or magic, whatever, you know,
Mhm.
it's fine. It was just like I never considered it like maybe it would be fireworks, but the way it was described, it was like a flash and then a gunpowder smell, and I was like,
Hmm.
wait a second. Like I thought, like, oh, but that would be really hard to control. So I'm going magic with this one, but I was curious if you had clocked it, and
No.
yeah, that's okay. That's okay. So the goblins carried them down and down into the mountain.
Hmm.
Bilbo once again wished to be home, not for the last time.
Hmm.
Tolkien takes a minute to clarify that this was the last they ever saw of the ponies, because goblins eat ponies.
I
My question
know.
is, was that really necessary?
I mean, they hung up the clothing of their victims, so like, I don't know, maybe. Um I thought that this chapter did an incredibly good job of letting us know that goblins are just the worst.
Yeah,
Okay?
yeah.
They are super awful terrible. They have the worst theme song ever, by the way. And um they would be, most likely to create weapons of mass destruction. They hate everybody and everything. It was interesting to see, and also kind of heartening to see him invest as much time giving us detail of a culture that was less good.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? He still invested the time to explain to us, yeah, these guys are awful bads, and these are the reasons why.
Yeah. So
Uh,
goblins are bad guys, right? And so you
mhm.
mentioned this, so I actually wrote this down as a question. I'm curious what you think about it. So he says that, these obvious bad guys likely invented machines and stuff that have since
Yeah.
troubled the world, especially devices used for killing large numbers of people at once. So do you think this is like a commentary, you know?
I do. So
Okay.
I'm so glad you asked that because I am not very good at historical correlation. I don't have the deets or the data or the years to just pull it, but it did very much sound like, for example, another warring countries. I'm like, I don't want to say it, but is this a commentary on Germany? Is this a commentary? Because he's a World War veteran,
Mm-hmm.
so he would have very strong feelings about the Axis parties, and so I did very much feel like I wonder if the goblins were to kind of um, satirize
Mm-hmm.
other countries that we fought against in World War One.
Yeah. I do wonder if definitely with the weapons, fight like war, weapons of war, mass destruction, and all of that. I definitely see a commentary there, but I also wonder if he's just kind of commenting on like technology and advancement, because I don't
Mm-hmm.
remember the exact thing that he said, but he was just like anything that they can do so that they don't actually have to do the work themselves. So like
Mm-hmm.
automation, like all of that stuff that separates people from the things that are being created.
Mm-hmm.
It almost felt like he doesn't like it, right? He appreciates the simpler things, right?
Mm-hmm.
The nature that the elves live in, the
Mm-hmm.
food and the ale, and the gardening and all the stuff that the hobbits are doing that like really involves work with their hands and stuff. And then you've got the goblins who are building machines and whatever. And so
Okay.
yeah, I think Tolkien's like a homeboy. He's like he wants to
Yeah.
keep things simple, right? That's the vibe that I'm getting, at least.
Okay. So some bias against automation and machinations and
Yeah.
things like that. Because what I took from it was that everything that they created was to do harm.
Mm,
They wouldn't create things that create things. They would create things that destroy. That's what I got from it. But
mm-hmm.
to your point, if you look at the era, if you look at the time, automation could be perceived in a very negative light.
Yeah. I think he just possibly, based on this one passage alone, which is obviously, taking that with a grain of salt, but yeah, it just feels like he really values working like with your hands and like being in touch with the things that you're creating. But time will tell, and I'm sure the internet could tell me, but for now I'm just spitballing, just speculating. So the great goblin begins questioning the dwarves, but all negotiation goes out the window when Thorin's blade, the goblin cleaver, gets pointed out. How absolutely unlucky that he just got that weapon, and it's the perfect thing to positively enrage his captors not 2 chapters later. Bummer.
So I will say that in the movies, the actor that they got to do the voice acting for the Goblin King was phenomenal and was absolutely the voice I heard all of this in.
Okay,
so,
nice.
Again, I'm kind of preparing myself because I've been told that this book is a departure from big parts of the movies. But there are big set pieces that have happened so far that by and large, these are the big beats that were in the movie as well. So I'm interested to see where the departure comes. But I thought the Goblin King was so fantastic. And I have no issue with the fact that he's now my head canon for the voice for the Goblin King.
That's fair. And I'll say Andy Serkis did a really good job too with all the goblins. He like changed their voices depending on who they were, or whatever. It was perfect. So when the goblins are in a true frenzy over the sword, Gandalf shows up, essentially flips the breaker, and takes the great goblin out with Foehammer, which was shining with its own light. As far as style points go, how would you rate Gandalf so far?
10.5. I mean, that's very upper crust wizardy props right there. Like, he really hit it on the head right there. Came in, blaze of blue. I mean,
pretty solid. So I wrote down a quote that I really appreciated. So it goes, Gandalf thought of most things, and though he could not do everything, he could do a great deal for friends in a tight corner. And I just wrote down like goals, TBH.
So
I would love that to be me.
Funny you wrote that down, because next to that I wrote, turns out Gandalf is a good guy to know in a pinch. LOL. It's canon.
Literally. Like, damn. He showed up. He's a good friend to have, let's put it that way. So they all run away in the dark, and Gandalf lights up his wand, which I didn't know that he had a wand. I always thought it was his staff. Do you think that's the same thing? Is that what they're talking about? Or does he also have a wand?
I don't know.
It doesn't matter necessarily. But I'm just like, oh, there is a wand here. I didn't realize. I
feel as though all the, the gloves are off and he's just doing whatever it takes to get the party out. So now the wand has come out when the gloves come off, kind of thing.
Ooh, I like that. Okay. So anyway, I know that's not terribly relevant, but it just caught my attention. Gandalf with a wand. So they run, taking turns holding Bilbo on their backs because he's much slower than them. The goblins are faster still and catch up to them, but Thorin and Gandalf hold them off for a respectable amount of time with what the goblins call Biter and Beater, their 2 swords. Because the dwarves advance far into the tunnels, the goblins activate stealth mode. They're described as follows. They put out their torches, and they slipped on soft shoes, and they chose out their very quickest runners with the sharpest ears and eyes. They ran forward as swift as weasels in the dark, and with hardly any more noise than bats. Okay, so this description gave me the heebie-jeebies, which is why I wrote it down, like, word for word. How did you feel about this whole chase?
So this is where the D&D vibes came in for me. This was Pass Without a Trace. I was like, oh, okay. They got some rogues. And they got some Pass Without a Trace that they're passing around. Okay, I see you.
Okay. I didn't think D&D. I just thought, like, how terrifying to be the one that they're chasing.
So I passed terrifying when we were in caves. I have I have just like a smidge of claustrophobia. So you put me in a dark, narrow place, I'm probably already not okay. Then you have
Okay.
horrific creatures chasing you. That's, I'm already done. It's fine.
Okay. So we're just both of us heebie-jeebied
Just done.
out.
Yeah.
All right. Great, great, great. So speaking of how terrible this whole thing was, the goblins catch up, trip up Dory, who is carrying Bilbo, and Bilbo falls into the blackness and hits his head on a rock, knocking him unconscious. And that's it for chapter 4. Talk about a cliffhanger. We were originally going to stop, like, do one episode, chapters 1 through 4. Can you imagine that being where we ended?
No, because I stopped at chapter 4 and I went exactly what I have in my thing. It's just keyboard smash caps lock. Oh my god, I know who's coming.
Yep. Yep. So I'm really glad that we decided to split this up the way we did, so we can dive right into chapter 5. So before we do that, though, because this chapter 5 is the big one, any final thoughts about chapter 4?
There was only one other thing in chapter 4. It was kind of early on. It was Over the Edge of the Wild. I thought that was a very cool name. Just another, homage to great writing. And that part gave a little bit more context on how that part of the world had gotten so dangerous. There was levels of detail given about the dragons carrying off the men, and then the goblins are spreading in secret. And so gave a little bit more context about why the area in general was just more dangerous. So very minor detail, but it jumped off the page at me, and I was like, that's cool. That helps me understand why it's such a treacherous travel.
Honestly, like, the edge of the wild thing also stood out to me. Like, I just thought, I was trying to not quote 17 passages from this one chapter. But I did note that, and it's just like Tolkien, man. He's a writer. Like, this guy, he's an auteur.
Yes.
But okay, so let's get into one of the single most iconic chapters, I think, in all of fantasy literature. Chapter 5, Riddles in the Dark. So I just got goosebumps literally just now reading that. So just based on the chapter title and the fact that this is The Hobbit, would you say that the average American would know what this chapter is about, whether or not they've read or watched The Hobbit?
I would say yes, and I think that is awesome. Honestly, I think I just genuinely do. I think that that's not the point of our podcast, but I feel like the last 20 years have been transformative for mainstreaming fantasy and making it palatable to the masses and delivering it to the masses. Not everybody can sit and read a book. My son has ADHD, and reading for pleasure is torturous for him, but he loves these stories, and having it transition to other media is a gift for so many people. And I know that folks get really defensive of the source material and of their headcanon, and they're entitled to that. But I, for one, as a fantasy lover, feel like we have been eating so good the last 5 years. Oh my God.
Yes.
It really hit me when small rant. It really hit me when Dune came out. I was like, we are here because of everything that's happened over the last 20, 25 years in fantasy mainstream media. And I am psyched because this is not what I had available to me in my youth. So I think that, love them or not, all of those movies, for example, Peter Jackson's movies, paved the way for showing that this can turn a profit and there is an audience, and also introduce the more important piece, introducing that media to a whole new audience that probably wouldn't have been able to partake, because it's not even just wouldn't partake. There are folks there that, a 400-page book is a daunting prospect for tons and tons of people.
I feel the same way about the Wheel of Time show, because it's like,
yes,
Lord of the Rings is like, while some people obviously wouldn't want to read these like books this size, which are like so much smaller than the Wheel of Time books, so much smaller. The Wheel of Time is 14 books plus a prequel. Like, when people hear that, they're like, absolutely not. Even big readers are like, no, thank you. And so in some ways, even if the show departs from the source materials, in certain aspects. It's just like, but we're getting the Wheel of Time on TV. Some people who would never ever meet Rand al'Thor get to meet Rand al'Thor because of the show, and it's so encouraging. And I know that's not what this podcast is about, but it's just like, I agree that it's super cool that
and
it's so
I just think
pervasive.
that it's wonderful. And I had that moment too where I opened it up and I was, like I said, when I closed chapter 4, I was like, crap, if they dropped him, like, Gollum is next, and then I saw the title and I was just, this is such an iconic moment. Again, just like opening that first chapter, that first opening, it's so ubiquitous in my world.
Yeah.
But still so powerful. I love that. I absolutely love that.
Yeah, reading this chapter, even knowing exactly what happens. I actually so we'll get to this, but the title is called Riddles in the Dark. So I was the like, personal story, I was the trivia overlord for my work trivia last season, which means 10 weeks of trivia. And for the final week, I did a final Jeopardy, which was, I gave one last question and you could bet all your points. And the question that I chose was one of the riddles from this chapter. And so I have recently revisited this chapter, like literally a couple of weeks ago. And still, I read this chapter like a day today, actually, with glee, because I just love it. So like, now that we've hyped it up as much as possible, let's get into it, shall we?
Yes.
Okay, so let's see. Opening your eyes and it being so dark, you second guess whether your eyes are actually open. That's a pretty good way of emphasizing just how dark it is. Did this description give you anxiety?
Yes. Yes. I have, in fact, had that moment, and it is incredibly unsettling. And so another very, an economy of words. It's not a big flowery sentence, but it certainly gets the point across.
It certainly does. Yeah, I could probably count on, like, other than when I wear an eye mask, I get, like, never do I wake up and it be pitch black, except for probably like a handful of times or less in my life. And it is incredibly disorienting. So that's what Bilbo is waking up to. Complete disorientation. All he can feel, his only sense that's working right now is the sense that tells him that there's stone under him. Like, wild, absolutely crazy, but a good start. So scrambling along, Bilbo almost immediately feels and picks up a tiny ring of cold metal, a turning point in his career, according to the narrator. He puts it in his pocket, but I'm not going to lie, if I found a ring like that, I probably would have just tried it on to see if it fit. How would you have reacted to this?
I don't know. I don't know that I would have been feeling around on the ground. Like, if I probably would have put it in my pocket just because I don't know what it is. I think I would probably just put it in my pocket.
Okay.
But like, that was, your quote is my very first bullet. It was a turning point in his career, but he did not know it. And next to it, I wrote, understatement of the millennia.
Yeah, exactly. Under the turning point of his career, of Gollum's career, of the future of Middle Earth. Like, things are changing now because of you. So, like, thanks for that, Bilbo.
Yeah.
I can't imagine, like, he clearly knew it was a ring because that's how it was described. Although maybe he didn't. But like, even just the fact that in my mind, if I put a ring in my pocket, that ring is gone. Like, because my pockets are not trustworthy. And in this case, the ring, though he didn't know it, is also not trustworthy. So yeah, I just feel like for safekeeping, that's what I would have done. But we're all different.
Love that our first interaction with the ring is also very, you could throw it away. Like, he thought nothing of it. He just put it in his pocket and continued on his way.
Moved on. Yeah, no worries. So Bilbo soon sits down, and I love this, gives himself up to complete miserableness. Once again, extremely relatable. At least I think so. And then he realizes that he still has that short sword because he was storing it in his pants. As you do, I guess. Better yet, it's a fancy elvish blade that glows when goblins are around. So bolstered, he decides there's nothing for it but to go forward. So if I'm Bilbo, I feel like I try to retrace my steps, right? Because I know that there's one exit and it's behind me. But he decides onward. It's the only thing for it. Do you agree? Was that the smart call?
Oh, I don't know if I agree on that. I know that. I mean, I feel as though they did describe that behind him he knew there were goblins, and
Fair.
that he felt that the safest option was for him to go forward. I do also want to talk about the pipe.
Oh,
So
yes.
him giving into the despair, lasts 3 to 5 minutes. And he decides he's going to pack a pipe.
Hmm.
And it wasn't until he realized that he couldn't find any matches that he was truly despondent. And I don't know about you. Not to be a downer, but I've been in a tight spot once or twice. I've been in
Hmm.
some pretty crappy situations. And again, just overly relating to The Hobbit, where it's not the situation that surrounds you, it's the fact that you can't find a light. Okay?
It's like getting kicked when you're down, right? Like, this is
Yes.
terrible. I'm in the bottom of a giant,
Yes.
labyrinth of
Yes.
under mountain
Anybody got a light?
caves. Yeah,
Anybody?
literally. But by golly, I've got my pipe. Thank
Yeah.
God. And
And it also gave me, again, because you and I are both pop culture fans.
yeah.
It gave me Constantine vibes when he's just like trying to light us. Anybody got a light? Anybody? That's exactly what I thought of, and I just thought that it was funny. And again, just the very brief nature, and I think that I feel comfortable saying I feel like it's a little bit of insight into the Hobbit nature. Like nothing gets you down for too long. I'm willing
Hmm.
to go out on a limb and say that's the vibe that it gives me, and I like it.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, no, go forward. It's the only thing to do. I think that it's more commentary on Hobbit culture.
Oh, that's
And
fun.
just that's what we do. Okay.
Move on. All right. So, speaking of Hobbit culture, when I think of hobbits, I first think of comfortable things: food, ale, warmth, song. But rereading this, I'm reminded that there is so much more to them. They don't easily lose their sense of direction underground. They can
Mm-hmm.
hide easily,
Mm-hmm.
move quietly, and
Mm-hmm.
recover wonderfully from falls and bruises. Very convenient for this situation, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
So, is this giving you a greater appreciation of hobbits and their abilities?
It is. So literally the next bullet that I had said all of the things that you just said, but also it contrasts something that's said in an earlier chapter, which is there's nothing magical about hobbits as a people. But if you take all of that into consideration,
It's pretty magical.
those are pretty handy skills to have. So just because they're not doing any spell casting doesn't mean they don't have any attributes working in their favor.
Attributes. That's giving D&D. They're a
I,
little roguish.
they are, halflings. Gotta love them.
It's true. It's true. So Bilbo, proceeding forward, because why not, runs into an underground lake, which would be such an enormous nope for me. Can I just let me say that first? Even before finding out that Gollum lived down there, an underground lake, absolutely not. Pass, turning around. But we are introduced to Gollum. Any initial reactions from his description?
First off, Bilbo can't swim. So
Yes.
the terrifying nature of being presented with what if the only way out is on the other side of that water? Not to take away from Gollum. We're gonna
I didn't even think about that.
But
I clocked that he couldn't swim, but I didn't think
yeah.
about that. Ugh.
Yeah. So I just I was like, that sounds, if you talk about a rock in a hard place, talk about being in a tight place. What if the water is what's between you and freedom?
You're between a rock and a lake that you can't swim across.
Yeah.
That's pretty brutal. Okay, so Bilbo, but okay, Gollum.
Gollum.
Thoughts?
So Gollum comes out in a boat, and that is something that, again, that was one of those moments that in the cartoon, Gollum has a boat,
Mm-hmm.
and 7-year-old Jessica paid it no mind, but now, and it was not the way that it was in the movie necessarily. And so now the significance is there because it is deep enough water that he needs a boat. The other quote right around this part of the chapter was, this was located down at the very roots of the mountain. So, this is also foreshadowing for some of the riddling that they do. But again, just the wording, the word choice is just chef's kiss.
Mm-hmm.
And then Gollum, in the beginning, Gollum seems relatively benign, but certainly as their interaction progresses, he no longer seems benign. And you absolutely realize by the time they look for their birthday present that you would have to be savage to survive in those conditions.
Yeah, for sure. So his initial description, the image of him silently and swiftly paddling his boat with his large feet dangling over the side, like from 8, 9 years old when I read this for the first time, like that image, that mental image has never left me. And honestly, like I don't always mental image books that I'm reading. Honestly, like I don't get a picture of what a certain character looks like necessarily in my head, but I recall doing that for The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings in some ways, especially though for Gollum. And just like I just picture his little feet like doing the boat. I don't know why, but that just stuck with me so much. And I think part of it is a testament to how Tolkien really shows you through his words what you're supposed to be saying. So yeah, I just needed to point that out. So this is also unimportant in the grand scheme, but I want to bring it up. It's notable for me as someone who was raised Catholic. Tolkien, who was also a Catholic, mentions that Gollum ate a lot of fish, but that he also liked meat. So suggesting that fish isn't meat is what's happening here. During Lent, if you're Catholic, you can't eat meat on Fridays, but you can eat fish. And my dad would tell you that's because fish isn't meat. I disagree with that. Where are you on the fish is meat debate?
I am Gollum. I'll eat meat and fish.
Okay,
I do think that fish is meat.
Okay, that's the debate. That I'm like, fish is meat? What are you talking about, Tolkien?
Yeah, so I mean, but there are folks that refer to themselves as pescatarian. So I know all kinds of folks that have very specific dietary lifestyles that they've built for themselves. And I do know folks who they'll eat seafood, and even more specific than that, they'll eat shellfish or they'll eat regular fish, but they won't eat shellfish. They have very specific boundaries. For me, fish is meat, but I also, I was not raised Catholic, but I was raised Christian. And there is a role for Lent, and also 20 years in the service industry. Fish Fridays are a real thing. Like
they really are.
So I'm well aware of fish on Fridays.
Okay, this passage, like, it just reminded me that Tolkien was Catholic more than anything else. I was like, okay, this distinction between fish and meat, I forgot. Like I hadn't considered that he was Catholic this while I've been rereading. Now I remember.
Yep.
Because of this specific thing. Anyways, I know that's not relevant. I just had to bring it up. So Gollum isn't super hungry, so he suggests a game of riddles, which is apparently a sacred ritual of immense antiquity. Like, who knew? If Gollum wins, he eats Bilbo. And if Bilbo wins, Gollum shows him the way out. No pressure, right?
Yeah. So again, the idea of this part, coming back to talk about this part of Gollum is very benign and is really sharp contrast to the way that I viewed him by the end of the chapter. Even knowing all that I knew going into the chapter, it's very different Gollum at the beginning of the chapter versus the end.
Yeah, although the fact that, like, he isn't, they do mention, he's not super hungry. If he was, he would have throttled first and asked questions later. Like, that's from the beginning. He's not
But it's a very matter-of-fact way that it was put to us. You know what I mean? I think that it was brilliantly done. That's what it boils down to. I do think that it was incredibly well done.
That's fair.
The other thing that happened during the riddling, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
There was a comment that he made about riddling with other funny creatures sitting in their holes. And this made my hackles go up a little bit because, and this can be rhetorical because I don't necessarily want you to answer, but this made me think of how the movies handled Smeagol and whether or not this was referring to Smeagol and other hobbits in hobbit holes, and it made my skin crawl a little bit. So again, you don't have to answer it. I don't want foreknowledge, but that's what I thought of in the moment when I saw it, and I highlighted it. And again, I did the whoa, because like, if that's a pretty deep foreshadowing. The first time we meet him, they're making foreshadowing references to his prior life.
Yeah. Okay. We'll call that one rhetorical. So they go back and forth, almost stumping each other with various riddles, until Bilbo accidentally asks for his riddle, "What have I got in my pocket?"
Yeah.
How do you feel about how this played out?
I feel like that's a real thing that could happen, that you're just trying to go back. I feel as though there was a comment made at the beginning of each volley where, he immediately responds with this one. So if you're going back and forth rapid fire like that, I feel like it could happen.
Okay. So I'm not going to lie. Since riddles is such a sacred game, apparently, I just subscribed to that immediately, believed it. It never sat well with me that's how Bilbo won. Obviously the alternative was Gollum eating him, so he was going to have to get away somehow. But the fact that he won like that, we've talked about this, that I'm lawful good. So yeah. I think my alignment is no, that's not a fair question. And also the fact that you refused to tell him what was in your pocket after the fact, very low. I was really annoyed by that. Did that bother you at all?
I think that this is a great question, because as soon as you mentioned it, I was like, whoa, here's where our lawful good versus lawful neutral really, really shows. Because me sitting over here all by myself going, he would have eaten you. He would have throttled you and eaten you without exchanging a word with you. You owe him nothing. I don't care. Yeah. You won because you survived the encounter. But I do, it's one of the things I respect about you dearly is you are a rules lawyer. And if you're going to subscribe to this is a sacred tradition, well, Buster, you better follow all the rules.
Better follow the dang rules. Yeah, I was let's just say not mad, because I did want him to win ultimately. I was just disappointed. Yeah, I do want to say though, I have to share my least favorite riddle. This riddle, whenever I was looking through the riddles, because I was doing, coming up with the trivia question, Final Jeopardy, I looked through all of them, and this one, I literally just how is this a riddle? First of all, okay, here it is. No legs lay on one leg. 2 legs sat near on 3 legs. 4 legs got some. In what universe is that a riddle?
So I read it 3 times and gave up.
Thank you. So you were trying to solve the riddles as you were reading?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I get it. No.
Yes, no. And as we're talking about favorite riddles, so that was also my least favorite, because I was really mad that I couldn't get it.
And it was dumb. I don't think it's a real riddle. You could say that about anything. I could literally be ring light above rectangle, humming to my right. And nobody would get that it's this is my streaming setup, because there's a desktop right there and my monitor. You know what I mean?
Right.
So you go. That one just bugged me.
So that one bugged me too. And I got really, I get quite snooty about it when I don't get my own way. All by myself, reading my Kindle, just making snooty faces. I liked that the riddles that they used in the movies were in there. I liked that there were more riddles than that was in the movie. I thought that was neat. And the riddle about the dark was my favorite.
That's the one I picked for Final Jeopardy. You have good taste.
Yeah.
I love that one. I think it's poetic. I think it's just thematically on point. I love it. I love it. And also, I will say, for anyone who's wondering, the person who was in first place got it wrong. So, yeah, they didn't end up winning the season because they clearly didn't read The Hobbit. Basically. Bad on them.
I've done trivia with you Jeopardy style, and it is no easy feat.
Yeah, I was thinking Final Jeopardy should be something that anybody could get, even if they don't have the foreknowledge. So technically they could have puzzled it out, but they did not. So it ended up going to a Tolkien fan, which oh no,
Shucks.
Can't believe that happened. A Tolkien fan won my trivia season. Surprise. Okay,
Yes.
so that's my favorite riddle. So do you think, let's see. Oh yeah, do you think Bilbo should have had to tell Gollum what was in his pockets? You kind of already answered that, but like,
I don't.
no?
I don't. I understand why you do.
Okay.
I think that honestly, my view of that encounter is colored by the fact that I know without a doubt that Gollum would have killed him without question if any two factors were different. If he were more hungry, if he were more irritated, if the day was Tuesday. You know what I mean? Like I know,
Yeah.
without hesitation, Gollum would have just killed him outright. So I never felt like Bilbo owed Gollum fair play.
Okay. Fine. So Gollum scared the hell out of me when I was a kid, right? Especially
Yes.
the moment he finds out about his birthday present. The
Mm-hmm.
hissing, the glowing eyes that turn into green fire,
I have
the
that highlighted.
yeah, the urgent questions. So he was creepy at first, in my opinion, but when he
Mm-hmm.
got frantic after he realized the ring was missing,
Mm-hmm.
I was terrified for Bilbo. Like I know in my first read, and even again, I was just like, Jesus Christ, this is like heightened. Well, also Andy Serkis doing the Gollum voice. Like
Yes.
literally, he's doing the breathing that he does, the like hissing, the shrieking. It was like, you know, it was a performance. So I was by
Mm-hmm.
the end of this just like, yeah, so how was it? Yeah. How do you feel about Tolkien's ability to elicit fear?
I would say that it was incredibly effective for the written word. Having seen it performed now on the big screen is incredible, and I don't think anybody will ever top Andy Serkis's Gollum for me,
Yeah.
honestly. Um, but even so, reading it, I felt like he was able to add that frenetic nature, that anxiety, that tension through the written word, which is not easy.
Impressive.
Yeah, it's not easy. So I think that it's so much better in visual format, but they had incredibly rich source material to work from.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
chapter is incredible.
It it really is. So Bilbo slips on the ring by accident as he's fleeing from this frantic Gollum, who's clearly at this point out for blood.
Mm-hmm.
But when Gollum comes upon him, he breezes right by him. So, surprise! The ring is a ring of power, and it makes the wearer invisible. How shocked were you by this revelation?
I was not, unfortunately, I was not shocked. However, I will say that I do think that it was interesting that he did it in a very understated way. There were no real bells and whistles. I had to go back because I was like, wait, is he wearing the ring? Did I miss it? I mean, it was very matter of fact, like, and so his finger went in, it was very subtle.
Mm-hmm.
It was not a lot of fanfare, and oh, well, apparently I'm invisible now. Also, what stood out to me
Yeah.
is he referred to it as a ring of power, which, as you know, I watched the show as well. So I was like, this is the first time we're seeing that reference, that particular phrase being used.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it was interesting that the roots for that already exists here in this first story.
This first little book. So
Mm-hmm.
many seeds are being planted for
Mm-hmm.
future stories that we're going to read on
Mm-hmm.
this podcast. But are there dragons? Where all podcasts are available. So Gollum decides Bilbo probably actually knew the way out because
Mm-hmm.
he knew the way in. So he proceeds to the back door. When he gets to the final passage, he stops for fear of the goblins and leaving his home any further behind. Bilbo has a crisis of conscience. First thinking he'd kill Gollum, but then taking pity on him. What would you have done here?
I don't know, because again, I find Bilbo so relatable, and I think that again, we're only a quarter of the way into the book, and he's already exhibiting this level of empathy. And for reasons that I already know, he's going to be even more empathetic for him in the future. The quote that I have is glimpse of endless unmarked days without light or hope of betterment, hard stone, cold fish, sneaking and whispering. And I'm just like, you just met this creature. you have a pretty good idea he would have eaten you, and yet you're still going forward with empathy. It's very touching. It's a little naive, but mostly touching.
Yeah. So I like to think that if I knew that I had the vaulting ability that Bilbo apparently has, that I would have vaulted Gollum. But like, if I'm being completely honest, and this might surprise you based on my discomfort with how the riddle game ended up, I think that I would have killed him, because Gollum was trying to. This is, brace yourself for a legal analysis.
Yeah.
Gollum was content to stay there, essentially. He's guarding the door, the only escape. Bilbo only has so much time left without starving to death or going thirsty or having goblins come across him or whatever. So basically, Gollum is between him and his life, right? And so in my mind, in my convoluted, twisted way, not only is Gollum trying to block him from his livelihood, but he's also intending to murder him at a moment's notice, assuming he finds him death, right, to Bilbo. And so to me, it's like almost a twisted form of self-defense to preemptively kill him, because Gollum was actively trying to do him in.
It's him or me.
It's him or me. That's how it would have felt. And it's like, in that moment, it's me. Like, it's just me. And honestly, the way he thinks about Gollum and takes mercy on him, I understand, but at the same time, I probably would have like rationalized it in my head, at least to work myself up to it. Like, this is a mercy. He has such a life, and I am trying to just do this quest. It's a good thing. Like, I'm living a good life. I don't deserve to die in the caves that he's just living in for some reason. Like, yeah, I think I would have killed him. But if assuming I didn't know that I could vault like Bilbo can vault, because holy, that's like an Olympic level jump that he made. Yeah.
For a not so big character.
For a not so big character, yeah. So I just confess to being not as good of a person. But again, it's like my lawful good. Like, in my mind, that's lawful, just based on all of my rationalizations. But again, it's all based on perspective. So
I mean, life is basically all about the stories we tell ourselves, right?
That's deep. So true. So true. Okay, so Bilbo. Oh yeah, no, you go ahead.
I was just gonna say the only other thing is I do feel like there's a little bit of a shift in my perspective over the last 20 years, say, with the movies coming out and everything, that a younger version of me didn't have patience for the pity, like viewed it as pity versus empathy. And for whatever reason, whatever kind of dysfunction I subscribe to, pity was less admirable than empathy.
Yeah, that's fair. I could see that. And well, we know that Bilbo is, what did they say at the beginning of the book, in his 50s. So even though as kids we read and we're like, this is a fun story, now as like adults, and he's a whole adult, it's like, oh, some of the decisions he's making, he's wise in some ways. And it makes sense given his age. So yeah. Anyways, Bilbo vaults over Gollum and proceeds down the passage. He eventually turns the corner, having seen sunlight, only to find a boatload of goblins guarding a stone door, who can see him because the ring maybe or maybe not played one last trick on him before officially him becoming its owner. It slipped back into his pocket. So he panics, slips it on, and then just like this mayhem ensues whenever he goes invisible. What did you expect from this encounter, and how did it compare to what actually happened, to your expectations?
I would say what I didn't expect is I didn't expect for the commentary of the ring being tricksy and trying to get one more trick in on him before it succumbed to being his. That definitely took me by surprise. The chaos didn't take me by surprise. The near miss at the door didn't take me by surprise. I think that was it. The ring doesn't technically have a POV in any other media. So having Tolkien talk about that was an added layer of complexity that I really kind of dug. Kind of like talking about the purse being mischief.
Yeah.
So again, for a world where they talk about magic in very specific places, and yet it's still very pervasive.
I love that. Yeah, it felt the frenzy that ensued to me felt so kind of cartoonish. You know, I'm picturing like have you seen the Barbie movie?
Not yet.
Okay. Well,
Soon.
there's a scene in it where people are like chasing things and they're just like doing idiotic things in this chase, and it makes no sense, right? It feels like out of a Wile E. Coyote movie where they're just like not actually making any progress in this wild frenzy. And also I have to once again shout out Andy Serkis, because it was whenever he vanished and they're trying to figure out what to do, the different voices that he used, it was literally like, this way, got the door. Like, he did it so well, how like they all had different voices and stuff, that it literally felt like it was happening, like I could see it. So it was a fun little scene. So then Bilbo bursts his buttons off, squeezing out of the door, which was just barely cracked, and he slips away. So you're Bilbo at this point. What do you do?
Well, I'd probably throw up behind a tree and never ever go in another cave or dark space again.
Fair.
Sorry, did you want a real answer? Because that's...
No, I mean, that's real. After that, after that little brief moment of panic and decision to never revisit darkness,
I would definitely investigate my ring that made me invisible.
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting little thing. And I guess in my mind, I was thinking, where are the dwarves?
Yes. So it would be a tie between what the hell kind of ring is this and where the hell are my people?
Right. Yeah. I can't remember how he meets the dwarves again. So in my mind, I was like, are the dwarves in the like antechamber, like right in the entrance? Like, are they there? Are the goblins holding them captive? Did they already escape and they just like happen to meet up right outside? Like, I literally was just like, I have no idea how this happens. And then he gets out, and by the end of the chapter, we don't meet the dwarves. So I'm just over here like, where are my boys? Where's Billy, Killy, Ori, Nori, and all of them? You know, like, so. Yes. I'm excited to see where they are, because I forgot.
I am too. One of the reasons why we're shoehorning this in is so that we can get back to the reading part.
Basically, yeah. And so we could release one episode a week. So hopefully everybody appreciates that cadence.
Yeah.
But we'll see. So that's it. That's the end of the chapter. The end of this stream recording. Do you have any thoughts about the chapters that we read, chapters 3 through 5?
I mean, they were chocker block full. That was a busy section of book. And we're only about a third of the way through the book based on my ebook reader. So
yeah, that sounds about right.
We have, definitely meeting Gollum was a big first moment. I was ready for that. So now I can't wait to see. I'm curious to see what 6 and 7 bring.
Yeah.
So
same.
You heard it here first, guys and girls and others. Next reading is chapters 6 and 7.
It is. Get hyped. Maybe we'll meet up with the dwarves again.
Here's hoping. Okay. Well, this is where we're going to close for the night. So thank you so much for tuning in to episode 2 of But Are There Dragons? Brought to you by us, your hosts, Jessica Sadai and Kritter XD. Don't forget to follow us as But Are There Dragons on YouTube, Instagram, and TikToks, and But Dragons Pod, just one T, on X, formerly known as Twitter. You can also find Kritter at Kritter XD, Kritter with a K, on YouTube, TikTok, and X, and at Kritter_XD on Instagram. You can find me by searching for Shelf Indulgence on TikTok, Instagram, and X. And that's it for us today. We are still workshopping some catchphrases, so let us know on social media what you think about this one. Tonight's catchphrase is, meet us where the whimsy takes you. Thank you, and good night.